In the courtyard of the Okoye household, noise was a constant thing. Pots clanging, footsteps rushing, chickens shrieking, children squabbling. But the noise that mattered most came from mouths sharp as razors and eyes full of envy. Irioma had learned long ago how to read a room by who avoided her gaze. Since her father's death, her place in the family had shifted like a rug pulled beneath her feet. 17, quiet and shaped like her late mother, Irioma had always drawn attention she didn't ask for. The other girls her age whispered cruel things behind her back and smiled falsely to her face. Her stepmother, Mama Nwakigo, had once said in the open, "Even silence can be a kind of boasting." And Irioma had been silent ever since. Her step-siblings treated her like a servant. She fetched water while they played games. She stirred the soup and washed their wrappers, even as her hands blistered from the soap. She bore it all with the same quiet mouth, the same patient, downward gaze. But envy does not like patience. It feeds on it. So they planned something. It was Obinna, her oldest stepbrother, who led the charge, though it was the girls who gathered the red ants in a clay bowl, baiting them with rotting fruit behind the latrine. They released the insects into Irioma's sleeping mat that night, while she was still bent over the fire, scraping yam skins into the ash. Her mat was in the outer corridor, near the kitchen wall, far from the rooms where the favored children slept. It wasn't really a room, just a thin mat of palm fronds laid beside the broken mortar, surrounded by discarded shoes and plantain peels. It smelled of smoke and spilt oil, but she called it her space because at least it was hers. That night she was exhausted. The day had worn her body thin, pounding yam, scrubbing floors, enduring Mama Nwakigo's endless complaints. She barely noticed how still the night was, how strange the quiet felt. Her eyelids dropped the moment she lay down. It didn't take long. The first bite came like a needle pressed into soft skin. Then another. And another. By the time she opened her eyes, the pain had become unbearable, dozens of pinpricks searing her thighs, arms, neck. She screamed. The sound that tore out of her was primal, not from her throat but from something older, deeper, buried in bone. She thrashed, trying to tear the mat away, but the ants were inside her wrapper, crawling down her chest into her waistband, biting and biting and biting. She ran. She didn't know where, only away from the mat, from the crawling pain, from the sensation of her body being eaten alive. She clawed at her clothes, ripping them from her shoulders, tearing the fabric that clung to her chest. She stumbled into the courtyard, naked from the waist up, red welts already blooming across her skin like cursed flowers. Laughter exploded. Obinna's voice was the loudest. "The goat has gone mad." Two of the girls pointed and cackled, doubling over as more siblings poured out of the house to watch. Someone called for water, not to help her but to douse the scene. One of the smaller boys mimicked her scream. Another clapped as if it were all a play. She stood in the center of the courtyard, panting, hair wild, eyes wide. Her body burned. Her pride shattered. She felt like she was watching herself from somewhere else, as if her spirit had fled her skin to escape the humiliation. Her dignity, her quiet armor, it died there under the moonlight, beneath the weight of jeering eyes. But something else woke. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just a shift, like a breath inhaled after a long silence. Her feet rooted to the ground. Her eyes no longer darted. Her arms dropped to her sides, open as if welcoming something. A wind stirred, despite the still air. The fire in the cooking pit flared, unprovoked. And in the corner of the courtyard, where the shadows clung thickest, something shimmered, not light, but movement. A suggestion of shape. Of presence. The laughter faltered. Obinna's grin slackened. One of the girls stepped back. Only Irioma didn't move. She felt the shift inside her, the pulse that no longer matched her heartbeat, the warmth rising along her spine, the hum in her teeth. Her skin tingled where the ants had bitten her, but now the pain was distant, like a memory being rewritten. A low sound echoed. It wasn't a growl. Not from a throat. It came from beneath their feet, from the earth. Something had answered her scream. Something had seen her, stripped and bleeding, and said, "Enough." Mama Nwakigo rushed into the courtyard, mouth already forming a scold, but the words never came. She stopped short at the sight of her, Irioma bare-chested, bitten and red, but standing straight as a staff, unmoving as a shrine idol. Behind her, the shadows curled like tendrils. The mat she had slept on smoldered suddenly, the edges blackening. Ants crawled in disarray, scattering from the woven fronds as tiny flames licked the mat's edge. "The mat is burning," someone shouted. But no one moved to stop it. Because all eyes were fixed on Irioma now. Her eyes glowed, just for a breath, a flicker, with a color not found in firelight. Her lips parted. She exhaled. And every ant, as if pulled by a silent command, froze mid-crawl. That silence crushed the courtyard. The flames on the mat died on their own, as if satisfied. Irioma turned slowly. She walked back to her space, untouched by the scorched edges, stepped onto the mat that no longer moved, and wrapped the tattered cloth around her shoulders. The burn marks on her skin pulsed faintly, not angry, not fresh, but healing already. No one spoke. She looked once over her shoulder. Her gaze was calm. Not cold. Not furious. Just aware. Obina looked away. So did Mama Nwakigo. So did everyone else. That night, Irioma slept without interruption. And in the morning, a small red ant sat beside her mat, unmoving, unharmed, as if waiting for instruction. Days passed, but the sting of that night did not fade. Not from her skin, not from the memory of laughter echoing off mud walls, not from the whispers that now slithered around every corner she turned. The welts left by the ants healed quickly, faster than they should have, some said, but the shame stayed. It settled on Irioma like a second skin, invisible but suffocating. When she walked through the compound, eyes followed her. Some openly. Some behind veils of pity or thinly veiled disgust. Children mimicked her scream in the alleyways. The women at the stream clucked their tongues when she approached. She brought it on herself, one said as she scrubbed a wrapper against the stone. She must be cursed, another added, barely whispering. She shamed her body in front of elders, a third murmured, even though no elder had lifted a finger to help her. The worst part was how ordinary it all was. Life didn't pause. The sun still rose and meals were still cooked. Laughter still echoed through the yard, only now it was brittle, sharp-edged, cracking just a bit when she came near. Her stepmother didn't say a word about the burning mat. Not about the flames or the frozen ants. Not about the way the fire had sparked without oil, without wind. Not about how it died instantly when Irioma looked at it. But she didn't need to say anything. She moved Irioma's chores farther away from the house, told her to fetch water from the farther stream, to wash clothes near the grove instead of by the basin. Small things. Quiet punishments. And when night fell, Irioma no longer rolled out her mat near the kitchen wall. She began laying it outside, near the mango tree where goats sometimes gathered. No one asked her why. No one invited her back. She didn't expect them to. The open sky became her roof, the tree her wall. Her ears learned to listen not just for voices, but for wind shifts, for animal calls, for the crackle of leaves under feet that weren't hers. Her body learned the cool rhythm of the night, the way the moonlight moved like water across her skin. The shame followed her there too. It crept into her thoughts like a vine twisting around her spine. She remembered the way her arms had flailed that night, the way her wrapper had come undone, the way she had screamed, not with dignity or power but raw, wordless pain. She had not looked strong. She had looked mad, wild, uncontrollable. And they had laughed. Sometimes she cried when the wind was loud enough to swallow the sound. But only a little. Then the ants returned. Not the way they had come before, pouring in with bite and fury, but quietly like old companions arriving without announcement. She noticed them one night as she lay curled in her wrapper beneath the tree. Tiny red bodies weaving in and out of the grass near her mat. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Not marching. Not hunting. Just gathering. She didn't move. She expected pain. Expected the familiar bite on her calf or wrist. But nothing came. One ant climbed her ankle. Stopped. Another found the crook of her elbow. Rested there. By dawn, a thin line of them had formed beside her mat, like a soft red border, never touching her, never crawling past the cloth she slept on. Just present. Still. Watching. She didn't scream. She didn't swat. She breathed. The next night they returned. By the third, they had built a small nest a few inches from her mat, a cluster of dry leaves shaped into a dome. At night, they scurried in and out, carrying bits of seed, bark, and ash. During the day they vanished. Some of the smaller children noticed. They pointed from a distance. The ants sleep with her, one giggled. His mother slapped the back of his head and dragged him away. Another day, a boy named Emeka tried to throw stones at her while she rested. The moment the first stone hit the ground near her, a wave of red erupted from the nest. The ants surged toward him like a breaking tide. He ran screaming, slapping at his legs. His screams echoed all evening. After that, no one disturbed her again. But the whispers grew louder. They said she was training the ants. That she had made a pact with earth spirits. That she bathed in blood. That her mother had once spoken to trees, and now the daughter whispered to insects. The more they whispered, the more distant she became. She moved less during the day, ate in silence, slept in the same place every night, spoke only when spoken to, and even then her voice came from far away, like it had to cross a long road to find her mouth. Some people avoided that part of the compound entirely. Others left small offerings, a gourd of water, roasted groundnuts, bits of yam. No one said why. She never touched the offerings, but they disappeared by morning anyway. The ants dragged them piece by piece into the nest. One night, she sat up and whispered aloud for the first time in days. "I don't hate you," she said. The ants froze. "I know you were sent to break me. I know that wasn't your fault." A breeze moved through the leaves. The nest didn't stir. "You bit me," and they laughed. "But I woke up." She reached a hand toward the nest. Slowly. Her fingers hovered over the leaves. One ant crawled up to her palm. It did not bite. It rested. And something inside her, something wrapped tight around her chest since that night, loosened. She didn't weep, but she exhaled. For the first time in days she truly exhaled. The shame didn't vanish. It clung to her, ghost-like, whispering doubts at the edge of her mind. But now it had company, something firmer, quieter, more watchful. Not strength. Not yet. But the beginning of it. And as the moon climbed the sky, pale and full, Irioma lay back on her mat, the red border of ants guarding her on every side, and she closed her eyes, not afraid of sleep. This time she knew what watched her in the dark. And it was on her side. The third bite didn't come out of malice. It didn't come out of rage or accident or cruelty. It came like a greeting, deliberate, careful, and final. It happened one evening just as the sun was bowing to dusk, throwing copper light across the fields. Irioma was sitting beneath the mango tree, her usual place now, where her mat was always dusted clean and the red ants built their tiny citadel beside her. She no longer feared the dark or the silence. They had become her kin. Her breath matched the rhythms of the wind. She did not twitch at shadows anymore. She had just closed her eyes when she felt it. A single ant, heavier than usual, slower, crawled up her arm. It moved with strange precision, not like the aimless wanderings of its kin. It paused at the bend of her elbow, then continued upward, past her shoulder, until it reached the hollow just above her collarbone. And then it bit. Not hard. Not painful, not like the first time. Not the rage of a swarm sent to shame her. This was something else. She gasped, not from pain but from the heat. A warmth spread from the bite, not sharp or burning but deep, like embers pressed into her skin. She expected the sting to grow, to fade, to swell, but it didn't. Instead, the sensation began to shift. It spread in slow arcs, radiating outward from the point of contact, as if invisible lines were being drawn beneath her skin. Her breath caught. She looked down, and though the sun had dipped low, though the world was wrapped in gold and blue, she saw it. Faint lines blooming along her collar, curling like vines, symmetrical, deliberate. Marks. Not scratches. Not welts. Patterns. They shimmered, only for a moment, then settled into the skin as though they'd always been there. Her skin wasn't broken. There was no blood. Just light. The ant, finished, crawled down her chest and disappeared into the nest. Not another one followed. She sat in stunned silence for a long time. Her hand trembled as she touched the spot. It was warm. Alive. That night, when the moon climbed high and silver, Irioma rose to fetch water. She walked past the cooking pit, through the darkened yard. A boy passing the opposite way froze and stared. "Your skin?" he whispered. She looked down. The patterns, those curling, glowing arcs, shimmered faintly under the moonlight, like threads of gold woven into flesh. They didn't glow like fire or lanterns, but with the soft pulse of something breathing. The boy stepped back and ran. By morning the whole compound knew. Whispers filled every corner. That she had been marked by spirits. That the ants had cursed her. That she had been bitten again, and this time it had entered her blood. The children avoided her now, even the brave ones who used to tease. The women of the compound stopped offering greetings. And the men, especially the older boys, watched her with something new in their eyes. Not ridicule. Fear. It was Obina who said it first. "She's not normal anymore." "She was never normal," someone added. "She's becoming wild." At the stream they refused to wash near her. When she walked through the path to the grove, someone left a palm frond marked with chalk, a sign of warding. A warning. Still she said nothing. Until the healer came. He was old, bent, skin like dried leather. The priestess had summoned him from the far side of the village. She hadn't come herself, perhaps unwilling to get close. But the healer arrived alone, carrying a calabash of herbs and a bundle of feathers. He found her by the tree. She did not rise to greet him. He asked for her wrist. She extended it. He stared at her collarbone. She pulled down the neckline of her wrapper so he could see the markings. He said nothing for a long time. Then he sighed. "It's not natural," he said softly. "Not spirit work. Not curse." She tilted her head. "Then what?" "It's change," he said. "But not from outside. From within." He looked at the ants, then at the nest, then back at her. "They protect you," he said. "But they do not control you." She nodded once. That part she already knew. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They woke something. The fire didn't do it. The shame didn't. The pain didn't. But that bite, that bond, that did." He handed her the feathers. "Burn these when the moon is full. It may help guide the path." She did not ask what kind of path. She already felt the road beneath her feet. It hummed through her bones. That night she lay on her mat and stared up at the sky. Her skin glowed faintly. When she ran her fingers along the markings, they tingled, not like nerves but like memory, as if her body was remembering something older than speech. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the shame she smiled. Not because she was healed, not because she was free, but because she knew now, she wasn't broken. She was transforming. Every laugh that had stabbed her ribs, every whisper that had clawed her spirit, they were part of the molting, the slow shedding of who she had been when they first called her weak. Let them whisper. Let them fear. The ants did not follow her now, they waited for her. She wasn't a victim of their bite. She was a bearer of it. And when she rose at dawn, water jug balanced on her glowing shoulder, she walked past every mouth that dared not speak, every eye that dared not look, and she smiled again. A real one this time. Because her skin was not a shame. It was a map. The dreams had begun days before. They came not like stories but sensations, dirt beneath fingernails, the weight of 1,000 footsteps, the scent of earth thick and rich. Sometimes Irioma would wake with her fingers twitching as if digging. Sometimes she'd hear whispers right before sleep, not words exactly but a kind of rhythm, a vibration. It didn't frighten her. If anything, it pulled her. Like a tide whispering to the shore. On the 7th night she followed it. The ants left the nest beside her mat at dusk, forming a long trail, not scattered, not meandering, but perfectly straight, perfectly steady. Irioma watched in silence as they streamed into the grass beyond the compound, into the bush path that wound past the yam fields, past the cassava grove, past even the oldest trees that people warned children not to play near. She followed them barefoot, her wrapper tied tight, her hair bound in a scarf. The night air clung to her skin, warm and damp. Crickets chirped. A full moon painted the world silver. No one saw her go. No one tried to stop her. With every step the forest thickened. The path narrowed. Her feet sank deeper into loam, into the scent of growing things and old roots. The ants glowed faintly under moonlight, their red backs like tiny drops of oil. She followed them for what felt like hours, though time stretched oddly here. Her thoughts didn't race. Her body didn't tire. She moved without urgency, without fear, only a growing sense that she was nearing something. Then the trees parted, and she saw it. It rose from the forest floor like a throne carved from the bones of the earth, an anthill taller than any she'd ever seen, at least 10 feet high, wide at the base and narrowing to a jagged crown. It pulsed softly as if breathing. Ants crawled in and out of its many holes like blood moving through veins. The entire structure shimmered faintly under moonlight. She stepped into the clearing and the ants ahead of her broke away, scattering to the sides. The air grew dense. She couldn't breathe for a moment, not out of fear but reverence. The dreams had not lied. She took a slow step forward, then another, until she stood inches from the mound. A warm breeze rose from it, scented like soil after rain, sweet and sharp. The mound made no sound, and yet, her ears rang. Not painfully. Not like noise. Like music she couldn't hear yet. She reached out her hand. The moment her fingers touched the warm, damp clay, something passed into her. Not a jolt, not a shock, but a thrum. A recognition. And then darkness. She didn't fall so much as float. The world tilted, spun, and folded around her like wings. She felt her knees buckle, but she did not feel the ground. Just silence. Deep, dark silence, filled with nothing, and then everything. She woke with the sun on her skin. Dew clung to her wrapper. The air smelled of moss. Her body was whole, unbruised, unbitten. She lay curled in the grass beside the mound. Ants covered her. Not one had bitten her. They moved across her arms, her face, her bare legs, her throat. Their touch was soft like rain. Her breath caught as they moved in spirals, not chaotic but deliberate. They traced the markings on her skin, the ones the glowing bite had left days ago. And then she heard it. Not with her ears, not exactly. A hum. A language. It didn't use words. Not the way humans did. But she understood it all the same. It came in pulses, like drumming beneath the soil, like the tapping of rain on rooftops, like the ripple of heat through dry grass. You came. She didn't speak aloud. She only thought, yes. You heard us. Yes. You were marked. And you answered, yes. Then silence. The ants slowed. One crawled to her forehead and rested there, unmoving. A second stopped on her palm. The rest began retreating, not in panic, not in haste, but with ceremony. When the last one disappeared into the mound, Irioma sat up. She felt strange. Light. Empty but not in a hollow way, more like a gourd newly carved, waiting to be filled. The forest shimmered. She stood slowly. Her joints moved easily, as if they too had been oiled by something deep within the earth. She walked to the mound again and laid her palm against it. This time she didn't faint. But her ears rang louder, and this time the words came in fragments, sharper than before. The body remembers what the mouth forgets. The ground carries stories that the sky cannot hear. You are not only girl. You are not only bitten. You are becoming. She stepped back and her chest tightened, not in fear but awe. Her fingers twitched again, like they were reaching for something in the dark. She turned. The path was still there. But the forest looked different now. The trees leaned in like listeners. The leaves seemed to murmur. The soil felt warmer underfoot. When she walked, she did not feel alone. By the time she reached the edge of the compound, the sky had turned pale with dawn. Smoke drifted lazily from cooking fires. Roosters crowed. Pots clanged. Life resumed as if nothing had happened. But everything had. She passed no one on her way to the mango tree. She lay her mat down gently. Saturday. Closed her eyes. The humming didn't stop. Now it lived in her. The language of the ants wasn't made for mouths, she knew now. It was meant for bones. For nerves. For the spaces between blood beats. And she could hear it. Understand it. She didn't smile right away. She sat still for hours listening. Listening to the ants under the soil. To the dirt shifting. To the old things remembering. When she finally did smile, it wasn't the fragile smile of someone recovering. It was the quiet smile of someone awakening. Of someone returning from somewhere sacred. Someone no longer just a girl, but a bridge. They waited for her to scream again. That was the whole point. The trap was simple, too simple. Too much like the first time. A fresh mat seemingly kind. A bowl of roasted yam placed sweetly near it. And underneath, scattered with crushed leaves to mask their scent, a swarm of fire ants. The stepsister had spent all day gathering them, shaking branches near the termite mounds, tipping dried fruit skins over ant hills. She had laughed with her friends as they scooped the angry red swarm into a clay pot sealed with goat hide. They had whispered that this would be the end of Irioma's pride, her quietness mistaken for defiance, her stillness now needing to be broken again. She thinks she's above us, one hissed. Let her dance. She won't walk away this time, the stepsister smirked. Not without scars. By dusk, everything was in place. The pot hidden beneath the mat. The cloth shifted slightly so when she sat, or better yet lay down, it would crack open. But they forgot something. They forgot that the ants had already chosen her. When Irioma entered the yard, she didn't walk like someone cautious. She moved like someone who belonged. She passed the others without looking, carrying a calabash of water balanced easily on her shoulder, the folds of her wrapper fluttering around her legs. Her face was calm, unreadable, her bare feet silent on the sand. She stopped near the mat. The air was still. The girls tried not to breathe. She looked down, then tilted her head slightly, just slightly, as if she could hear something others couldn't. Then she sat. And nothing happened. No scream. No twitch. No cry. The air remained still. The girls leaned in. Irioma sat with her knees pulled up, arms resting loosely over them. Her eyes scanned the sky, watching the first stars blink awake. And then they saw it. A single fire ant crawled from beneath the mat. It didn't run. It didn't sting. It walked leisurely up her ankle, over the lines of her calf, across the curve of her knee. Then another followed. And another. Dozens of fire ants poured out from the pot beneath the mat, scaling her limbs like they had found a home, not a target. They didn't bite. They didn't swarm in chaos. They moved like threads through fabric, smooth, intentional. They reached her shoulders and continued upward. Some climbed into her braids and vanished between the coiled strands. One settled near her temple and simply stopped. By now the girls weren't smiling. They weren't whispering. They were frozen. Irioma looked down at her arms, at the ants resting there, and slowly raised a hand, not to brush them away, but to let one crawl from her wrist to her palm. She held it gently, gazing at it with a kind of quiet reverence. Then one of the girls couldn't take it anymore. She stepped forward with a cloth in hand, rushing toward Irioma. "Get them off her," she yelled, as if Irioma were under attack and too stunned to react. The moment her hand swung down to brush the ants away, it happened. The sting came instantly. She screamed. Not once, but again. And again. Dropping the cloth, she slapped her arms wildly, but the ants clung fast, their stings lighting her skin in angry red. She staggered backward, crying, scratching at her arms as more joined in. Another girl tried to help her and met the same fate, fiery stings that pulsed up her legs, her wrist, her face. The screams rose. But Irioma remained seated, unmoved, unharmed. The fire ants continued to nest calmly in her hair, a few now curling behind her ears like jewelry. They shimmered in the moonlight. The laughter had stopped. The compound, once filled with cruel giggles and satisfied grins, now held only silence. The kind of silence that comes when people realize they were not in control of what they played with. That perhaps they never were. Irioma turned her head. Just enough to look at her stepsister across the yard. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She only looked. And in that gaze was the fire they had hoped would burn her. Except now it burned them instead. The girls fled, scratching, cursing, some falling over pots and baskets in their rush to escape the yard. The stepsister followed last, wide-eyed, her lips pale, as if she had seen something she could never unsee. Irioma turned back to the sky. One by one the ants retreated. Down her arms. Off her legs. Into the earth. All except one, the one still resting at the base of her braid just behind her ear. It stayed. And when she finally stood, brushing dust from her wrapper, the ground did not seem so hard beneath her anymore. It was warm, familiar, alive. It began as a sound she heard in her dreams, a low whistle like wind slipping between stones or a breath held too long. At first, she thought it was the hum of the forest at night, the muttering of the trees, or the memory of her mother's lullabies distorted by time. But then she woke one morning with the sound still lingering on her lips. Not a song. Not quite a tune. A call. The ground beneath her mat felt warmer that morning. It wasn't heat from the sun or the fire pit. It was something older, something patient. The ants had begun sleeping beside her ribs now, curling like a necklace of living beads. They did not bite. They did not stir unless she moved too quickly. Sometimes she would wake to find them tracing the marks on her arms, the ones left by the glowing bite, as though they were reading her skin. That morning she sat beneath the mango tree and tried the sound again. Low and slow, the way the dream had shown her. A breath in, lips pursed just enough, and then, the whistle. Soft, almost nothing, but clear. It floated through the compound like a secret. A few heads turned. Goats shifted their hooves. A chicken fluttered awkwardly from the edge of the cooking shed. And the ground moved. At first it was barely noticeable. Just a shiver in the dust. A ripple that could have been the wind. Then a crack opened between two stones. And from it came the ants. Not in a rush. Not in panic. They poured out like liquid shadow, thousands of them, moving in unison, fanning into the shape of a circle around her. Then they formed a line. Then another, crossing the first. A triangle bloomed inside the circle. Then two more, until they had built a perfect six-pointed star with her at the center. Irioma didn't move. She felt a strange pressure in her chest. Not pain, not fear. Like something holy had just taken her breath and shaped it into command. When she stopped whistling, the ants stopped moving. When she tried the sound again, two notes, rising and falling, they scattered. Formed letters. They wrote her name. Irioma. The letters didn't last long. As soon as she blinked, they were gone, carried away into the nest. She stood, trembling. She tried again the next night. And the next. Sometimes the ants answered, sometimes they didn't. But the ground always listened. By the end of the week, she could summon them at will. She kept it secret at first. Not out of fear, but because it wasn't for anyone else. The power had come to her alone, in shame and silence and soil. Let them laugh, she thought. Let them spit at her as she passed. She had her audience now, one older than any of them with more patience and sharper memory. But then came the night she used it. It wasn't planned. Not really. Her stepsister had spent the evening boasting again, how Irioma had been bit so badly the first time she tore off her own wrapper. How the boys laughed. How she screamed like a goat being butchered. The other girls laughed. Even the older women pretended not to hear. Irioma said nothing. She returned to her mat and lay down, eyes open, staring at the sky. She waited until all lights had gone out, until the compound's snoring rose and fell like waves. Then she stood. Barefoot, silent, she walked to the edge of the yard and whistled. Low and slow. The ground answered. Cracks formed instantly, silent fissures between the stones. Ants emerged, not a few but hundreds. Then thousands. They crawled up her ankles and legs, but she didn't flinch. She knelt and drew a shape in the sand. Not her name this time. A message. She wrote it slow, careful, sweeping her fingers through the dirt. We are watching. The ants followed every curve of her finger, tracing the words in glistening black. They lined the letters, thick and exact. When she stepped back, the phrase glowed under the moonlight, alive and moving. She walked to the window of her stepsister's hut. Bent low. Drew the same message again. Then another, at the door of the boy's hut. We are watching. By the third mark, the ants no longer waited for her hands. They moved on their own, spelling her thoughts before she finished thinking them. She walked back to her mat and slept like a child. But the others did not. In the morning, the courtyard was tense. The first to scream was one of the younger boys. He stumbled from his hut, pointing at the dirt outside his window, his lips shaking. Then the stepsister emerged, eyes red, her wrapper twisted from a sleepless night. More came, murmuring, pointing. The messages were gone. But the earth was torn where they'd been. The ants had left clawed, writhing trails as though the words had moved in the night. No one spoke to Irioma. No one mocked her that day. They watched her walk to the stream. Watched her dip her calabash in silence. When she returned, ants followed. Not hundreds. Just a small trail behind her heel, visible only to those who looked closely. She did not smile. But she did whistle. And the wind paused to listen. From that day on, the compound held its breath when she passed. Children quieted. Grown men averted their gaze. No one dared sweat the ants anymore. Not even when they crawled too close to the hearth. Because everyone remembered the dirt. Everyone remembered the letters. And everyone wondered, if the ground could listen, what else could it tell her? The festival of Okika came with drums and roasted yam, wrapped meats and palm wine, garlands of marigold and hibiscus strung from doorway to shrine. The air hummed with laughter, and even those who carried grudges seemed willing to smile under the open sun, if only for a day. Irioma had no garland. She had no new wrapper like the other girls. She wore the same earth-colored cloth she always wore, faded at the seams, tied carefully at her waist. Her feet were bare. Her eyes were calm. And she was invited. Not because they wanted her there, but because they had to. It was tradition. Every household sent its children, its widows, its orphans. There was food enough to forget hardship. There were stories around the fire. There was a spirit of forgetting, if only temporary, if only shallow. They sat her far from the main table, under the Udala tree, near the pestle racks. It was where the shameful ones were made to sit, the half-mad, the dirty, the strange. No one sat beside her. Not at first. But the ants did. They came with the wind like they always did now. A steady trickle around her toes, small trails near her mat, pausing at the edge of her calabash like sentries. They didn't touch her food. They never did. The first plate of trouble was her stepmother's. She had come in dyed orange cloth, her face painted too brightly, laughing loudly and hugging women she normally scorned. She sat with her sisters and cousins and heaped her plate with steaming jollof, bitter leaf soup, goat meat. She raised her morsel of meat and dropped it with a shriek. That's hundreds of them, bursting out from the folds of meat, pouring over the edge of her plate, crawling up her wrists and vanishing into her sleeves. She slapped wildly, overturning the bowl. People laughed at first, thinking it was just misfortune, some unlucky swarm. Until the next cousin found ants in her puff-puff. Then another shrieked as a caterpillar curled beneath her spoon. It spread like a slow, crawling wave, a quiet infestation that grew more precise with each course. Roasted corn swarmed. Okra soup bubbled with beetles. Plantains unraveled with centipedes coiled inside. But only for some. The woman beside Irioma, a quiet widow from the neighboring village, was served a clean dish. A boy who'd once shared his plantain chips with her by the stream had the crispest puff-puff, golden and whole. But those who had mocked her? Laughed when she tore her wrapper that night, when shame had burned her bare. They could not lift a bite without finding something moving beneath it. "Irioma," someone whispered. Not accusingly, but cautiously. They looked over, expecting to see her gloating, perhaps watching with wicked delight. Instead, they saw her eating quietly, her plate clean, untouched by even the wind. She chewed slowly, methodically, like nothing around her had changed. Like she couldn't hear the panic rising in waves from the elders' table. Her fingers did not twitch. Her eyes did not rise. But the ants ringed her like a crown. The girls she had once bathed with avoided her gaze now. Boys who had once hissed at her on paths turned their backs. Her stepsister had not dared to sit that day. She stood stiff at the side of the clearing, half hidden behind a palm tree, one hand clenched in her wrapper, eyes wide with recognition. The feast quieted long before sunset. Mothers made excuses to leave early. Fathers clutched their stomachs, swearing they'd suddenly remembered a task. By the time the drumming began, the central mat was nearly empty. Irioma remained where she was. The ants crawled a perfect circle around her mat. Some fanned into spirals. Others spelled shapes in the dirt, a triangle, a curve, a line crossed through both. Protection. Warning. Judgment. She didn't tell them to stop. She didn't need to. When the priest came, dressed in cowries and feathers, his staff dragging a long red cord behind him, he did not approach her directly. He stood at a distance and struck the staff twice into the earth. The sound cracked across the clearing like thunder. She looked at him, finally. He did not speak to her. He bowed his head. Just slightly. Then turned and left. That night the house was too quiet. Her stepmother didn't speak. Her stepsister didn't laugh. Someone tried to sweep the ants from the corridor, but they returned within minutes in greater numbers. Irioma sat beneath the mango tree again, listening. When a child wandered close, a boy from the next compound, barely old enough to walk, she reached into her pocket and gave him a piece of dried fruit. He smiled. The ants made way for him. His mother bowed low before collecting him, her voice trembling with thanks. By dawn, 3 more women came. Not to mock, not to scold, but to ask. They brought gifts: soap, cassava flour, a strip of blue cloth. One whispered, "Can you ask them not to bite my child?" Another said, "My husband lies. Can the ground tell me?" The third only knelt and offered nothing, just waited. Irioma said nothing. But she whistled, low and slow, and the earth answered, not in words, but in movement, in presence. From then on, no one laughed at her name. And at every feast thereafter, no one dared eat until Irioma had tasted first. They said she vanished. But really, Irioma just walked. She left the compound quietly, without fanfare or weeping. No farewell. No threat. She took only what she needed: a gourd of water, a wrap for the chill, a stone carved with strange lines she found one morning beside her mat. She walked barefoot into the forest where others feared to go. Where the trees grew close enough to silence footsteps. Where the light fell in thin golden blades. Where the ground she knew would listen best. There she built her hut. It was small. No bigger than a palm seller's stall. Made from clay and branches and twine she twisted herself. She didn't ask for help, and no one dared offer it. Yet the structure stood firm, as if the forest itself approved. A roof of palm leaves, a doorway draped with old goat cloth, and a floor of packed red earth. But it wasn't just earth. It pulsed. Those who came later said the ground beneath her home vibrated softly, like a distant drumbeat. Some pressed their ears to the floor and claimed they heard whispering. Others felt a tingling in their feet, as though 1,000 tiny lives moved just beneath the surface. They weren't wrong. The ants had followed her. Not in a swarm, not all at once. But gradually, silently, over nights and days. They built something beneath her hut. Not a mound, not a tunnel, but a hive. A great, living hive of paths and chambers that never broke the surface. It breathed. It thrummed. And when Irioma slept, her body rose and fell with its rhythm. They said she didn't dream like others. That the ants gave her visions. Memories not her own. Secrets buried in gardens, in graves, in mouths that never spoke. That when she blinked in the mornings, she already knew who would come. And people did come. Not in crowds, never in crowds, but one by one. A man whose wife had vanished. A girl whose sister lied too easily. A mother whose child would not stop weeping in the night. They came barefoot, humble, offering kola nuts or folded cloth or dried honey. They stood at the edge of the clearing and waited. Irioma never answered the door. She never needed to. The earth did. Sometimes ants would pour from beneath the doorway and trace a word in the dirt. Liar. Wait. Gone. Sometimes they curled around the visitor's feet and refused to move until tears were shed. Other times they ignored the offering and left the person standing alone in the clearing, shivering in shame. No one stayed long. Justice, it seemed, was not a conversation anymore. It was a response. She never spoke, not once. Not even when her stepmother came, much later, trembling with age and regret. She brought nothing. She asked nothing. She simply knelt in the dirt and whispered a name, her own. Irioma did not come out. But the ants did. They crawled up the woman's hands, her arms, to her shoulders. Then they climbed down again, not biting, not hurrying, and vanished into the hive. The stepmother sobbed until dusk. No one ever saw her again. And still Irioma stayed. In her quiet hut with no fire, no song, no speech. But the ground never stopped humming. And on some nights, when the moon rose high and the forest held its breath, travelers claimed they saw her walking the trees, her body half shadow, half girl, with ants spiraling up her legs like anklets, her feet never touching the leaves. They said she no longer walked on the earth. She walked with it. The drought came without warning. One season the yam vines withered too early. The next, the river that curled around the village like a resting snake thinned to a trickle, then stopped. The soil cracked. The sky turned cruel. Chickens laid their eggs and left them. Goats bleated through dry throats. People whispered about curses and old wrongs. Eyes turned to the forest, to the girl who had left barefoot and silent years ago, the one the ants still answered. Her name returned before her did. Irioma might know, they said. Someone else murmured, she listens to the earth. And finally, when the village well collapsed with a groan like a dying throat, her family went to her. Not proud, not angry, but barefoot. Her stepmother led, brittle and bent with age, followed by her 2 sons and the girl who had once laughed loudest when the ants swarmed Irioma's skin. None of them spoke as they walked. They moved past the trees slowly, unsure if the very roots would rise up to shame them. When they reached her clearing, they didn't approach the hut. They waited, heads bowed, dust coating their feet. The trees whispered, but no wind stirred. There was only the hush of watching leaves. The ground, soft beneath the dry surface, began to shift. Ants poured out in silent lines, not chaotic, not rushed. Controlled. Measured. They surrounded the family in a perfect ring, then split in two, creating a path that led directly to the hut. From the doorway, Irioma stepped forward. She had not aged like others. Her skin was darker now, burnished with sun and ash, her hair in a single braid coiled at her crown. Her eyes were quiet. Not unkind but old. Older than drought. Older than grief. Older than shame. No one dared call her by name. She turned and walked without a word. They followed, barefoot, through thick bush that should have scratched and clawed but bent out of her way. The ants marched ahead, cutting a trail between thorns, past fallen logs and hidden stones. They walked for over an hour. And then the air changed. Coolness. The scent of wet stone. They came upon a spring, clear, hidden, untouched by drought. Water ran from a cracked stone mouth, feeding a shallow basin teeming with moss and soft grass. Birds chirped. Bees danced lazily overhead. The kind of place that should not have existed in this season. But it did. Because of her. The ants lined the basin's edge, a silent guard. Her stepmother sank to her knees. One of the boys wept openly, pressing his face into his palms. Only the stepsister remained standing, rigid, her voice trembling as she finally tried to speak. Irioma, she whispered. The ants moved. They climbed her feet slowly, wrapping around her ankles like bracelets. She gasped but didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just looked at the girl she had once called a dog, a curse, a thing to laugh at in the night. Irioma's voice was soft. But it reached every ear like a shout. Now you understand the sting. Nothing else. She turned and walked back the way she came, leaving them with the water and the ants. The stepsister did not scream. But she cried. The ants did not bite. But they did not leave her side. They held her there as the others drank, as the sun dipped low, as the sound of flowing water filled the space where pride once lived. And when the family returned to the village, they told no one what she had said. But they carried the truth with every step. And the sting did not fade. The stories outlived the drought. They outlived her stepmother's shame, her stepsister's trembling silence, and the crumbling walls of the house where Irioma once slept beside goats. They slipped between market stalls, through lullabies and basket-weaving songs, into the cracks of classroom walls. But the name had changed. No one called her Irioma anymore. To the children who played with beetles and built ant mounds from wet sand, she was Ground Mother. They said she could call water from stone with a whisper. That if you placed a kola nut beside an anthill and told the truth, your wish would come true. But if you lied even a little, the ants would know. They wouldn't bite, not unless you kept lying. Then the sting would come like fire beneath the skin, slow and impossible to outrun. Some called her a spirit now. Others said she was still human but only barely, that the ants had changed her from the inside. That her blood had grown thick with dirt and memory, and that she no longer needed sleep like the rest of them. When thunder rumbled, they said it was her laughter. When the ground shook, they said it was her warning. But the children loved her. They left small gifts outside their doors. Sugar cubes, dried mango, tiny wooden carvings shaped like ants. Not out of fear but respect. They would crouch beside the biggest anthills, cupping their hands to their mouths and whispering their secrets into the soil. "Tell Ground Mother," they'd say. "She'll know what to do." And sometimes, by morning, there would be a pattern traced in the dust. A spiral. A word. A trail leading to a hidden mango grove. Or a warning, sharp and simple. No. No one dared mock her now. The boys who once hurled insults at the edge of her clearing kept to the paths. They stepped over every anthill and murmured apologies when they accidentally kicked one. The girls who once turned their backs now told stories of her with awe, tying red cloth around their ankles on certain nights for protection, or to feel closer to her. Teachers told her story before harvest time. Mothers used her name to hush bickering children. "She hears you," they'd say. "Even the ground listens to her." And it did. The forest changed around her hut. Roots grew thicker, gentler, rising in arches, forming natural tunnels along her trails. The wind carried the scent of cool earth and rain, even on hot days. At dusk, the moss near her hut glowed faintly, and the trees seemed to bend inward, guarding something precious. Those brave enough to walk near said they saw her sometimes, not clearly but in flashes. A figure barefoot and still or moving like mist. Her silhouette dancing slowly across the clearing, ants weaving up her arms and down again, never stinging, never stopping. Her feet never made sound. The dirt beneath her never rose in dust. And when the moon was full, the trails through the forest shimmered faintly. Not with light but shape. Tiny golden lines traced through leaves and bark, forming the outline of a girl with her arms open, head tilted to the sky, surrounded by thousands of tiny shapes moving like breath. Some children called it the path of barefoot fire. Others said it was the ground remembering her step, glowing in thanks. She never returned to the village. But she was everywhere now, in their customs, in their silences, in their offerings. And sometimes when a lie slipped from a child's mouth, they would freeze and look around, at the dirt floor, the corners of the compound, the nearest mound, and whisper, "I'm sorry." Because the ground remembered. And the girl who once cried beneath a mat of red ants now stood in the soul of the land itself, quiet, watching, patient as roots, fierce as justice. Ground Mother. The name remained.